Hello, YouTube. This is Jensaarai1. Unfortunately, I was not able to participate in the full Fanalysis live stream review of The Last Jedi. I had just gotten back from visiting my grandmother and I hadn't seen the movie yet. Many of our fans have been asking for my thoughts on this movie, so here we go. I think it's a very poor movie, but I do think it's worth watching despite that. It's almost, I would compare it to Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice in that the movie is bad, but it's bad in such a way that it becomes a really, really unique experience and is worth looking at as almost an example of how far the bar can drop. It's memorable, and people will be discussing this movie for years to come, and the same can't be said for its predecessor, The Force Awakens. The Force Awakens places fan service ahead of what's best for the narrative, whereas this movie kind of places the wild whims of its director and writer, Rian Johnson, ahead of what's best for the narrative. And what you get in the movie is a lot of really interesting ideas, but none of them really pan out because the writing just isn't there. And sadly, the writing is the big problem with this movie. Like, every single actor in this movie gives a good performance, and the visual design and the production values are there. It's well done, sort of. More details later. First thing I'm going to talk about is the movie's structure. This is something that was discussed a great deal by pretty much everyone in the actual live stream review. This movie is it's very similar to the Clone Wars movie in that it's not structured like a movie. It's more like someone took 5 episodes of a TV series and edited them together back to back. Instead of a continuous through line that goes start to finish, instead it's like they're constantly setting up a narrative arc specifically so they can subvert it, almost like a cliffhanger at the end of an episode. But they keep doing this again and again and again throughout the entire episode and throughout the entire movie. And as a result, the storyline doesn't really have any real direction. It's not very cohesive. It's just spiraling off in all directions with no clear idea of what it's trying to do. It's a bit of a mess. The way the whole storyline is set up, the start of the movie, it basically with the Imperial fleet arriving at the Rebel base just as they're evacuating, it felt like the setup to a bad episode of Star Wars: The Clone Wars, with General Hux basically taking the place of TCW Grievous, just stomping around the bridge of his cruiser like as a pantomime villain, basically. Hi, I'm an evil pantomime villain, and here I am explaining everything we're here to do and what our motivation is, despite the fact that I would have debriefed everyone here hours ago before we even arrived. But I got to explain it for the benefit of the audience watching us through that secret camera over in the corner of the room, because this is a movie, and that's what the movie has. So many because movie moments, bits where you're just supposed to go with it. And I'm willing to turn a blind eye to a couple of those because every movie has them, but this movie is almost entirely defined by them. Like, there are just so many instances where something stupid happens and you're supposed to just go with it because movie, and anytime the characters actually do something intelligent, you're kind of left wondering, why didn't they do that 20 minutes ago? Why did they decide to wait until right now for this big climactic moment when they could have solved this problem ages ago? The whole plot of the movie is basically based around the First Order fleet pursuing the the Resistance fleet through space, with the Resistance fleet basically skirting just ahead of the First Order dreadnoughts at the point where they're feeling the turbo laser hits, but they're not really doing any damage. There are so many problems with this thing. It's basically a first act conflict that should have been resolved inside 45 minutes that gets stretched out, so it's basically movie length. It's pretty much the first 3/4 of the movie are centered around this chase, and Well, it basically makes the plot of the movie really, really tedious, especially because, A, on board the Rebel ships, no one's showing any real concern. There's no urgency, despite the fact that the bad guys are literally right on their heels the entire time. Everything's just really slow. Like, why the hell? Like, it's the fact that they actually stop and have an inauguration ceremony for Laura Dern as Admiral Purplehair kind of says it all. When in this kind of situation, she should have just taken command right then and there. So there's no urgency. None of these characters care, so why do we care? As was said in the live stream by everyone. And the thing is that both parties have it in their power to end this situation immediately. The First Order fleet could easily just catch up with the rebels by performing a micro jump. It's not hard. They don't have to just trail along behind them. They got hyperdrives. They can do that. Just micro jump ahead, head them off, shoot them down. And the Resistance, well, it's kind of established that they can just load all of their crews onto these tiny little transports and slip away with the First Order being none the wiser. And the thing is that I can understand them needing to take time to evacuate every single person from the fleet. This is addressed. But why the hell is the Resistance leadership not evac'd immediately? Why the hell are they still on this ship where they can be targeted? It just kind of goes nowhere. It's a waste of time. Like I said, it was tedious. And, ugh. The less said about Canto Bight, the better, but unfortunately, we got to discuss it. The Canto Bight arc is a complete waste of time, and frankly, it completely undercuts the whole conflict of the movie. It really contributes to the whole feeling of tedium that this movie has, with the big conflict with the Rebel fleet supposed to be a big deal, but then we come to this place where no one cares. Not even... It's like Finn and Rose kind of pay lip service to the fact that the conflict's going on, but even they don't really have any sense of urgency behind what they're doing or where they're going. And the whole thing with the Master Codebreaker, it's another example of a narrative arc that gets subverted just to keep the audience guessing, where they set up the character of the Master Codebreaker, but they just shove him aside without a second thought and replace him with Benicio del Toro's character, a complete nobody who ends up being able to do the exact same super awesome stuff that supposedly they needed the Master Codebreaker for. And it's also the absurdity of the fact that the Master Codebreaker that they need is on a planet that's within spitting distance of the Rebel fleet, somewhere that they can get to in 5 hours, pick him up, and get back before the Rebel fleet's fuel runs out, which is mentioned as taking 18 hours. So, galaxies are big. You're telling me that this fight just happens to be that close to a major casino planet where a guy like that can be found. And the most infuriating thing about this whole thing is the obvious social commentary message, which I just found extremely tiresome. They basically state that this planet is actually an evil place populated by the worst people because all of the rich people here at this casino gambling are arms dealers who got rich by being arms dealers. You're telling me that the only rich people in this setting are arms dealers, that there are no celebrities or legitimate businessmen, and that this is the vacation spot for... Like, you're basically telling me that this casino planet is basically the vacation spot for Bond villains. What? So now we come to Rey's interactions with Luke on... I can't even remember the planet's name. Let me just double check my notes. Give me a moment. Act 2. Act 2? Really? So, Rey and Luke's interactions on Act 2. Well, this is one of those instances that Antoine discussed in the main review of just a lot of bathos, where they're just undercutting the drama with, well, badly placed comedy. And, well, admittedly, this is jumping ahead a bit to the characters a bit, but I completely agree with Antoine. not my Luke Skywalker. The other thing is that it was teased in all the trailers and speculated that this planet is the Dagobah analog. Like, no two ways around it. But Rey doesn't actually do any. Like, firstly, let me just clarify that I really like Daisy Ridley's performance as Rey. If she was actually given some proper character within the writing and the storyline, I'd really, really like her. But as it stands, it's just a good performance with nothing to back it up. And a lot of the stuff that goes on here, it's like we're expecting it to be like Rey's Jedi training, where we can see her truly earn her power and earn her stripes as a Jedi and step up. But no, instead it just reinforces the whole natural talent who can pull powers out of her ass. Luke doesn't actually teach her anything. Instead, it's just Rey basically practicing and meditating on her own, with Luke supervising her once or twice. Like, she masters lightsaber combat by spending 20 minutes swinging her lightsaber at a rock with no actual training or sparring with Luke or anything like that. And Luke's lessons don't really add up to anything. They're just kind of a waste of time. And the dark side cave itself is a bit of a waste of time, because when Rey is finally drawn into the dark side cave, goes in there and embraces the dark side, we got that really, really interesting visual of the whole long line of Reys standing there, mirroring each other's movements with a chain of finger snaps. But the conflict itself just doesn't really add up to anything or amount to much, because it's like Rey basically comes in here, is confronted by the dark side of the Force, but instead of having some struggle with it, she basically just says, "Oh, dark side doesn't offer anything. I'm alone. Okay, we're done here. Darkseid's not going to tempt me ever again. There's nothing there." And the way they justify this within the plot of the movie by saying that Rey is supposed to be some avatar of the light, to me is just kind of stupid, because, well, my whole attitude is that the Force is a lot more fluid than that. You never have specific avatars for specific things. And, well, frankly, if you're going to be training as a Force wielder of any denomination, you earn your power through blood, sweat, and tears. The Force doesn't give you any shortcuts. And the other thing about observing Luke's daily routine, like, this is another bit where it's like they kind of established that Luke is supposed to have cut himself off from the Force, yet they keep retconning that, well, subverting that idea by showing him do casual Force feats, like the bit in here where he goes spear fishing with a big 100-foot spear that he uses also as a pole vault to leap across a gorge. And then the whole thing with the four-titted monster with the blue milk. I have no words. And now we come to the telepathic interplay between Rey and Kylo Ren. Well, firstly, it's later revealed in the movie that Supreme Leader Snoke is the one who's enabling this by using his powers to link their minds. And the only question I'm left with is, how? It's like a supremely powerful Force wielder like that linking his own mind to someone else makes perfect sense. He's projecting his power and his consciousness force like a single concentrated beam. But linking two separate people together without even having met one of them, without even knowing where one of them is, because a big plot point is that he himself didn't even find out about Luke's location until later in the movie when he telepathically mind rapes Rey when she's in his throne room. And my question is that if he was able to link her mind to Kylo Ren's, why didn't he just mind rape her to begin with? In fact, if Darksiders have the ability, well, if Force wielders in general have the ability to do that, then why is the Resistance even a threat at all? Because it is established that Force wielders can kill other people from great distances, even from light years away. We see that at the start of the movie when Snoke manhandles General Hux with telekinesis. So my question is that if he can just link up with your mind via Force-based telepathy, like, why isn't he just murdering the frickin' Resistance leadership before they even have a chance to do anything? It's the sort of thing where it's like nothing really quite makes sense, because A, he's not making full use of his powers, even though he's established as wielding the Force very proactively, And he doesn't really have any of the required secondary abilities that you would need to enable the powers that he has. Now, all of that aside, just focusing purely on the interplay between Rey and Ren, it was interesting. Because, well, firstly, this is the point when both of the actors were giving their strongest performances, so I was actually, paying attention and giving a little bit of a shit when I was listening to them discussing things. And I won't discuss the details of Luke's betrayal until I'm discussing Luke's character, but I am on the same page as Matt here. I really like the idea of playing around with different points of view and different people interpreting different things correctly. They just didn't really do it right. Because, again, goes back to the whole circumstances of the betrayal, which I will discuss later. So it's a very mixed bag. I found it interesting because the performances were good, but too many things just didn't add up. So, as to my thoughts on the finale that should have been, which I think we can all agree the events on board Snoke's dreadnought are, this is the point where the movie should have reached its climax and come to an end, but instead it just kept on going. Pretty much everything from Ren and Rey arriving in the throne room up to Rey being put in front of the magnifier to watch the Rebel fleet getting blowed up it's a ripoff of the throne room scene from Return of the Jedi. And it's just kind of another instance of the sequel trilogy leaning on original trilogy nostalgia to justify itself. And a lot of the little details, like, for example, I totally agree with Matt that Snoke praising Kylo Ren as he brings in Rey is completely pointless because he was the one who set this up, not Ren. All Ren did was literally just pick her up in the hangar and bring her upstairs. That's all he did. That's it. And the other thing is that he states that Luke Skywalker isn't worth worrying about because apparently Rey is the big avatar of the light side that he should be concerned about. Yet, he remains focused on Luke, mind rapes Rey to find out where Luke is, and then doesn't kill Rey. You just said that Rey is the one you should be afraid of, not Luke. So why aren't you killing Rey right here, right now? Why are you making Ren do it? And, well, throughout this entire movie, Snoke is essentially presented as Emperor Vitiate Light. So an all-seeing, all-knowing Dark Force demigod who wields his powers very proactively. So the fact that the guy who's this powerful, this perceptive gets, well, basically backstabbed in such a stupid manner with Ren just using telekinesis to turn the Anakin Skywalker lightsaber sitting on Snoke's throne so it points at Snoke and then igniting it. Like, firstly, how is Snoke not sensing Kylo Ren's telekinetic influence? Like, why is he just seeing, Kylo Ren turning the lightsaber in his hand instead of sensing the obvious force influence that's happening right next to him? And, well, basically what happens is that when Snoke is killed off, Kylo Ren steps up as the new supreme leader of the First Order. And this is basically a major instance of the First Order is completely undercut by this, because Snoke, as much of a bad character as he is at least presented as a competent and threatening antagonist. Dumping him and replacing him with Kylo Ren is a serious mistake because Kylo Ren is, well, he's a lot more competent and threatening in this movie than he was in Force Awakens, but he's still questionable at best. So the First Order, their effectiveness is just badly cut down, and it's not a good thing. The following fight scene where Ren and Rey team up and fight Snoke's surviving Imperial Guard is a good fight scene. I like it. And in fact, the one thing that kind of left me feeling a little bit conflicted about it is I do mess around in lightsaber sparring and, pretending to be a badass martial artist, even though I'm not. And my whole takeaway is, why is Kylo Ren fighting like me? This is weird. And then afterwards, where Ren basically offers Rey the choice of joining him and being part of his new First Order, forget the past, start something new, and then they get into a tug of war over the Anakin Skywalker lightsaber. Well, firstly, that tug of war, I don't know what you guys might think, but it struck me as a direct ripoff of Ryan versus Dorkman, where the fan film lightsaber duel basically ends with that exact thing. And secondly, the conflict itself is very much kind of representative of the problems with this movie, like both with its plot, but also with the production behind it. Because it's basically a struggle between Rey, the traditionalist Jedi, representing the old generation of fans, despite her inadequacies as a character. In this instance, she is representing the old ways, the classic fans. Whereas Ren, who's saying, forget the past, start something new, is kind of representing the Kathleen Kennedy-led story group and the new generation of, hardcore Disney canon Star Wars fans, and basically just fighting over the soul of Star Wars as represented by the Anakin Skywalker lightsaber, which ends with the lightsaber being ripped in half. So all the stuff in the throne room's going down, and a little bit before, you got Finn, Rose, and DJ sneaking on board the First Order Dreadnought to disable their hyperspace tracking system, which it's a plotline that ends up basically just going nowhere because they get caught and DJ betrays them to save his own hide. Okay, whatever, fair enough. But the problem is that DJ himself is just a really inconsistent character who kind of just jumps back and forth where they're setting him. It goes back to what we're saying about how this movie is constantly setting things up and then subverting them to keep you guessing. And DJ is the perfect example of that. And what you're left with is a character who is just wildly inconsistent. And frankly, his presence here is pointless because everything he does just doesn't add up or go anywhere. There's a bit on board their stolen ship where they're coming from Canto Bight to the Dreadnought where DJ hacks into the ship's computers to figure out stuff about the ship's original owner, and he's like, oh, he's an arms dealer. Okay, whatever. And then he says, okay, he sells weapons to the bad guys, but also to the good guys. And I'm just like, why is this sort of thing supposed to be something that undercuts the resistance and makes us question whether or not they're good guys? Because that to me seems like what they're trying to do here, but all they're doing is they're establishing the existence of a war profiteer who sells to everyone. The resistance, like, they're a low-level grassroots resistance movement. Of course they got to buy their weapons from frickin' arms dealers. Who the hell else are they going to buy from? It's not like they have factory planets churning out dreadnoughts. And then we get the fight between Finn and Phasma, who's apparently still alive. The fight happens, Phasma dies. And we don't feel anything because, well, the problem is that we don't care about Phasma. She's an antagonist that every single character reacts to her as if she's some scary hard ass who kills people for fun, but we never actually see it. We, the audience, don't have any real reason to care about her. Everything about her is always implication. So, as a result, nothing about her adds up. Nothing about her gets any kind of a reaction out of us, so why should we care? What this leads into is the epic ship slice, where Admiral Purplehair takes the surviving Rebel capital ship, turns it around, and shoots it at the First Order Dreadnought at light speed. Well, the way I see it, this basically represents the moment where the Resistance has basically won the war. Because by using a relatively small capital ship as a guided missile and just firing it into the First Order Dreadnoughts at light speed, they basically made it so all of those massive star dreadnoughts that the First Order sunk their resources into building are now useless because they can be one-shotted. It's like you probably wouldn't even need to use a capital ship as big as the Rebel capital ship. That smaller medical frigate that got shot up earlier in the movie could probably work just as well. So this is the Rebels winning the fight, but do you think this tactic is going to come up again in the following movies? I think not, because that would make sense. And the other thing I would mention about the ship slice is it's a great moment. Like, this is the one moment where the whole movie is just a moment where it's just like jaws drop. This is beautiful. This is gorgeous. This is amazing. Why didn't they do this 20 minutes ago? So, my thoughts on the Battle of Not Hoth, because that's what this is. This is the Battle of Not Hoth. Well, first thing I want to mention is the whole thing is established as taking place on a mineral planet that's basically got white salt flats on top, but every time the white salt gets disturbed, you see red minerals underneath. I originally went to see this movie with my best friend Kevin, and what he said to me during this whole battle is that this is the movie basically trying to present itself as a gem covered in fanboy salt. I'll just leave it at that and just let that sink in. Moving on. The first question I have is, why does the First Order even bother with fielding a ground assault against the rebel base that the Resistance has holed up in, instead of, I don't know, nuking them from orbit? Because the thing is that sure, the primary dreadnought is disabled and a lot of its escort fleet is disabled, but surely there are a few Star Destroyers in there that are still relatively intact and can pull off an orbital bombardment. It's like you don't even need to destroy the base or kill them. Just seal them in, leave them to starve. Have a ship in patrol above the planet to make sure no one slips away. And this is a minor quibble, but before the battle begins, Leia standing at the open door of the rebel base, looking out, playing the watchwoman, and commenting on and basically letting them know that the First Order forces are coming. My question is, why is she standing there instead of having the door already closed? And I know that this is so they can have Finn and Rose relink with the rebels and actually crash their shuttle through the front door and get inside before it's closed. But from an in-universe story perspective, why is that door not already closed? Like, that to me just seems, it's a very obvious kind of a daft because movie moment. It's just enabling something that needs to happen instead of, truly adding up. And then we get the battle where the Resistance salvages old Rebel Alliance equipment here and fights against the First Order. And, well, the battle itself is a loss. Their forces get completely decimated and they're forced to retreat back to the base. And at the end of it, Finn goes in for major heroic sacrifice, where he'll rams his ship right against the portable super laser that the First Order brought to blow open the rebel base. And Rose thinks it's a good idea to smash his ship out of the way and save his life. Because the message they're trying to push here is, you don't win by destroying the things you hate, you win by saving the things you love. What do you think Finn was trying to do? Do you think he was going in for a heroic sacrifice because he was some psychotic kamikaze who just wanted to burn the First Order? Well, based on his actions in the first movie, that actually makes sense. But within the context of the movie, she ruined his heroic sacrifice and undercut her own point because she allows the First Order to fire off their giant portable super laser and blow open the rebel base. So what the hell? And then Luke Skywalker comes back and starts participating. And my whole response to this whole thing is, finally, Luke Skywalker has finally shown up. It only took 2 whole movies for Luke Skywalker to finally show up. But then they undercut that. So we got the bit where Luke goes out in front of the rebel base and Kylo Ren orders all of the First Order AT-ATs, because that's what they are, to just open fire on Luke. And this was mentioned in the main live stream review. It's like, oh, is this going to be a Grandmaster level Luke feat where he just absorbs all the fire with Tuta Minis and comes away alive? Apparently, yes. And then he challenges Kylo Ren to single combat. Kylo Ren comes out, and it's after the fight, Luke is revealed to be a Force illusion. And so Luke's whole involvement in this battle was basically just to be a red herring to get the First Order's attention while the rebels snuck out through the back door and Rey bails them out again. And the big thing that really bothers me is the fact that immediately after doing this, we cut to Luke Skywalker still on Acto, where he's meditating, and apparently the strain of projecting his illusory self across the galaxy was so great that it killed him, and he vanishes and turns into a Force spirit. What? And that right there is kind of the reason why this movie is a little bit insulting, especially if you're a hardcore fan. Because the way I see it is, the main reason why you would want to make a Star Wars sequel trilogy in the first place is to see Grandmaster Luke be a badass. But these movies, not only do they not deliver on that front, they take a massive dump all over his character. And this is basically just the final nail in that coffin. And that's kind of that. It's like the movie has no clear resolution. The Resistance all piles on board the Millennium Falcon and they escape. And it's basically just a total reset button where we're just knocked back to square one, and, well, there's just no clear resolution. The rebels are still running. They're still... yeah. And now, you want to know my thoughts on the characters. Well, this is kind of the meat of this whole thing, because the characters are what this movie is where this movie really fails. It's like, I can let a terrible storyline pass if you at least give me some good characters. This movie doesn't. To clarify, I'm purely criticizing the characters as they are written. Every single actor in this movie gives a great performance. Every single person is bringing their A game. And because of that, I actually got a surprising amount of investment in some of these people, but that was purely on the back of the performances. The writing just isn't there for any of them. The prime example of this is Rey. Daisy Ridley is still delivering. She's a great actress. I love her. But Rey is still an OP Mary Sue with no backstory. And the fact of the matter is that they just pass off her backstory like it ain't no thing, which is another little instance of this movie catering to the whims of the director instead of what's best for the narrative. It's like Rey's backstory was one of the most heavily teased elements of The Force Awakens. And by refusing to pick up that particular plot thread, well, this movie doesn't even work as a follow-up to The Force Awakens. It's a perfect example of the movie just not even being able to stay consistent with itself and its own tie-in material. It just kind of does whatever. And Kylo Ren, well, Adam Driver does give a stronger performance here than he did in the previous movie. When he rages, it's actually kind of scary. It's not just a child throwing a tantrum. It's actually a disturbed individual breaking shit. And he's pretty much the only character in this movie who has any real development. There's actually a ghost of an arc for him, but he's still underwritten. He doesn't really have any real motivation. I don't understand why this guy chose to embrace the dark side. Like going by the way things were presented, he was basically bullied into falling to the dark side, and that's just something I just don't quite get. A good segue into a discussion of Luke. A more accurate title for this movie would be The Character Assassination of Luke Skywalker. At every single turn, Luke is basically dragged through the mud and undercut. And they basically just completely contradict and refute all of his established character traits. Every single last one of them. And it's absolutely infuriating. To suggest that Luke Skywalker would even entertain the idea of murdering one of his students just because he had dark side tendencies, it's not just out of character, it breaks character. It's just something that this character would never do, and to suggest that he would, well, either you don't know anything about this character or you're deliberately trying to subvert him. And the thing is, if that was the intention, it's not a clever deconstruction of Luke. It's just a betrayal. That's basically all it is. It's a betrayal. And it makes no sense. It doesn't add up. And then we come to Yoda's cameo. Firstly, Yoda looks terrible. It's like it looks like they basically took the Yoda character model from Star Wars Rebels and just slapped realistic skin textures onto it, because it just doesn't look like Yoda. It was cringeworthy. He was right in the middle of the uncanny valley, and it just made me shudder. He's And in his little interaction with Luke, he's got some good individual lines, but the overall dialogue scene just doesn't really add up to anything, especially given the context. Luke was not the master that Rey grew beyond. Rey just turfed him when she realized that he sucked. Shifting over and discussing the villain of the piece, Supreme Leader Snoke. Another instance of Rian Johnson's refusal to pick up a plot thread, breaking the setting. Snoke has no backstory, and because he doesn't have a backstory, it breaks the setting. Like, where did the First Order come from? What are they? It's basically a supposedly climactic threat that materialized out of nowhere with no preamble. And the other thing is that all of that aside, Snoke was the only competent villain in the Imperial camp, and killing him off to enable the rise of Kylo Ren as the central villain was a serious mistake, because Kylo Ren is not nearly as competent or intelligent as Snoke. And this actually feeds back into my complaints about Rey being a Mary Sue. She's a Mary Sue, but when she finally comes up against Snoke, she's completely outclassed and effortlessly overpowered. And my response was, yes, finally someone that Rey can't defeat just by being talented. Finally a villain who will challenge Rey and force her to develop, to force her to earn her power the hard way. But do they follow through on this? No. They kill him off. And now the only villain left is Kylo Ren, the person that Rey has proven that she can defeat just by being talented. Removing Snoke, the First Order is now completely impotent. This storyline is basically just turned into a countdown until Rey kills them all. Discussing a lot of the characters within the Rebels camp, well, Leia, all she really has is that Mary Poppins moment, which kind of pays lip service to her potential, but this never actually comes up in the storyline. This woman can save herself from the vacuum of space by telekinetically flying, and she has the ability to blast a frickin' heavy blast door off of its hinges with telekinesis. So if Leia can do this, why is Luke even necessary when Leia could provide Rey with all the training she needs? And more than anything else is that Leia's not really a very proactive character. She spends a lot of this movie delegating to other people, whether delegating to Poe or being forced to delegate to Vice Admiral Amilyn Holdo because she's incapacitated. So she's not proactive. At the end of the movie, she literally just tells everyone to follow Poe. Why? Poe is another one of those characters where they try to set up a guy who's not... He doesn't really have any actual development. They just set him up as being a specific character mold. He goes through the movie like this, and then something happens, and then he pulls an abrupt 180. There's no gradual figuring out his mistakes, learning to adapt. There's just sudden... It's like he spends most of the movie just wanting to take an offensive stance against the Empire, and then abruptly stops and switches over to, no, we need to preserve our own assets. It's like there's just no preamble for this, and it needed its preamble. It needed the build-up. And the other big thing is, this guy leads a mutiny. A bloody mutiny. And the characters basically just laugh it off. It's like, oh, what a troublemaker. I'm sorry, this guy just held his superior officer at fucking gunpoint and tried to commandeer control of the fleet. And they just laugh it off like it ain't no thing. Which kind of brings us to Vice Admiral Amilyn Holdo. It's all of her antagonism with Poe was kind of pointless. And a lot of people have tried to justify her refusal to give Poe information on her own plans as following military protocol, compartmentalization of information. Well, here's my response. If these people are supposed to be following military protocol, why isn't Holdo in uniform? Why is she running around in a cocktail dress? Secondly, if these people are supposed to be following military protocol, why isn't Poe being strung up for leading a mutiny? These people are not following military protocol. So why would she abruptly decide to follow that one aspect of military protocol, but nothing else? And the problem is that because Holdo spends most of the movie basically being a soft antagonist within the Rebel fleet, her heroic sacrifice doesn't really have any weight. It's like they basically just turn around and spend 5 minutes trying to build up some sympathy for her character, so we'll give a shit when she dies, but it's just not enough time. I still have a sour taste in my mouth from her, well, basically being a bitch to Poe. So, segueing over to Finn, well, again, John Boyega still gives a good performance, but Finn is still foolish and naive, and he's too inconsistent to pin down. His only real consistent motivation is his concern for Rey. It's like he jinxes back and forth between being willing to sacrifice himself for the rebels and do dangerous assignments for them, and then goes back to being a coward who wants to run and hide. Like, what? Why? Where? How? And I honestly don't get why Finn is considered a hero of the Alliance, well, a hero of the Resistance, for Rose to hero worship, because he didn't really do very much in the previous movie. And most of what he did do, it's like you honestly think that word would have spread that quickly when this movie is taking place so soon after The Force Awakens, which is actually another little minor problem with this movie. It takes place so soon after. None of these characters have any real opportunity to develop during the interim. It's like Kylo Ren, despite this only being a couple days later, makes an abrupt leap in his competency level. He's suddenly a capable operative within the First Order, whereas in the last movie, he was kind of laughably incompetent. And that's a bit of a tangent, but going back to Rose, well, quite simply, Rose fucked up Finn's heroic sacrifice and refuted her own point by making the deaths of 20 pilots irrelevant. Like what? Did she think that Finn was going in for the kamikaze run against the portable super laser because he wanted to bring the fight to the Empire and fuck them up? No, he was doing it because he didn't want them to blow open the front door of the rebel base. He wanted to save his friends, and she screws this up for him and basically enables the Empire to blow open the front door of the rebel base. If Luke Skywalker hadn't intervened at that point in the storyline, everyone would have died. And there's just no way Rose could have known about his intervention. So, yeah. Briefly discussing Benicio del Toro as DJ. DJ is basically the perfect embodiment of this movie's constant narrative subversion. It's, they go to Canto Bight to find the Master Code Breaker, but then dump the Master Code Breaker in favor of DJ, who is an apparent nobody who can somehow do the same stuff. And then it's like, in their presentation of DJ, they're constantly jinxing back and forth between, oh, ruthless criminal, or, oh, he's not so bad. Like the whole thing that goes down with Rose's little medallion. It's like, oh, give me that medallion. It's valuable. And they're like, okay, fine, here's the medallion. Fuck you. And then he uses the medallion as a little tool and then gives it back. But then immediately afterwards betrays all of the characters. It's like, well, I can understand him as a pretty classic example of a self-serving chaotic neutral, but his involvement in this storyline just doesn't really go anywhere. He's just kind of there as a plot device to get Rose and Finn on board the First Order Dreadnought for Finn's fight with Phasma. And as soon as he's fulfilled his purpose, he jumps ship and is gone and might as well have never been there. And that brings us to Phasma, who still does nothing within this plot. Until she actually picks up a weapon and starts fighting Finn, she's just a no-name stormtrooper commander that we're supposed to take seriously 'cause reasons. All she does is stand around and give orders. Like, if they made a point of having Phasma step up with a melee weapon with the intention of personally executing Finn and Rose, building her up as some sadistic maniac who's reveling in this, okay, I can understand why Finn would probably hate her, because they would have explained that this is the behavior he would have had to have dealt with as her subordinate. But the thing is that we have no reason to care when he takes her down. And, of course, the bit where Finn smashes the side of her helmet with that frickin' electrostaff tonfa thing that Callan hates, because that thing's fucking stupid, so rightly so. They basically just copied the visual from, the Star Wars comics of Darth Vader having part of his helmet blasted off so you can see his exposed eye poking through. And, it's another one of those just visual references that doesn't make me smile, it makes me facepalm, because, oh, you did that again. And General Hux. Hux is a pantomime caricature villain who just stomps around, basically giving evil villain speeches. And well, the thing is that he's basically fatally undercut at the start of the movie because first he's basically prank called by Poe, and then he spends all of the entire battles just shrieking at people, and then he gets telekinetically manhandled by Snoke. And it's like, again, he's impossible to take seriously. It's like TCW Grievous. He's just laughably incompetent. Pretty much the only competent officer within the First Order is the admiral in charge of the dreadnought that gets destroyed at the start of the movie, because he's actually observant and is giving intelligent orders and commenting on the situation and is actually maintaining his composure under fire. And, well, the only competent officer in the entire setting gets killed off at the start of the movie. So, in closing, first, I do want to say sorry if some of these segments came across as a bit rushed, but I just have so little to say about a lot of the stuff that went down in this movie, especially given that a lot of my own points were already covered in the live stream review. This is one of those rare cases where every member of our group is actually on the same page and in total agreement. It's, as I said at the start, the only real variable is whether or not we consider this movie worth watching. And like I said at the start, it's worth watching as an experience and as an example of how low the bar can go. And it's definitely entertaining and memorable, but it's a bad movie. I gotta be honest. This is a bad movie. The problem is that in the way it's set up, Rian Johnson basically placed his own random whims ahead of what was best for the narrative. He built this movie around subverting every single expectation that was laid out for it. And as a result, what he created was something that just doesn't even work as a follow-up to The Force Awakens, because it refuses to pick up any of the narrative threads that J.J. Abrams left from Force Awakens. Instead, it just kind of does its own thing. And, well, as a result, it's kind of a pointless entry that's just treading water. And the end of the movie is basically just a complete reset, with everything truly being knocked back to square one. And it really reinforces what I've been saying all along about the sequel trilogy being a total write-off. As far as I was concerned, even if this movie was the greatest Star Wars movie ever of all time, the sequel trilogy is still ruined because its previous entry, The Force Awakens, was nothing more than a teaser for its own sequel. Well, guess what? This movie is nothing more than a teaser for its own sequel, and doesn't even do a good job of following up its predecessor. So, yeah. Basically, JJ has his work cut out for him on episode 9, because now he has to get 3 movies worth of plot crammed into one. Whereas at least before, if Rian Johnson had actually done his job, it just would have been Force Awakens alone is the write-off, whereas the other 2 movies are good and pick up the slack. And I personally just don't think JJ's going to be able to pull it off. This movie it's an incoherent collection of plot holes that doesn't really add up to anything. Anytime the movie actually does do something smart or memorable, we're left wondering, why the heck didn't they do this sooner? It's like so much of this movie is because movie. Just go with it. Like, faint praise to go with all of my damning, it's got solid visuals and solid performances. Every single person involved in the production was bringing their A game, but Rian Johnson did not deliver on the script. This movie really should have been written by someone else. And, that's all I have to say about that.